Let's talk about quite possibly the last game you worked on when you were there, Kid Icarus Uprising.
Well, technically, I worked on Mario Party 9 after Kid Icarus.
Okay.
But I worked on Kid Icarus Uprising, which was a lot of fun. That was a Sakurai project, and that's a very interesting project to work on because he is like a mad scientist.
Okay.
You know, I guess, I mean, everyone listening to this probably knows he's the Smash Brothers guy.
Yes, that's right.
Kid Icarus Uprising was sort of an in-between project, which for him is still a giant, long project. And it was interesting because it's almost like I got on it not at the very start of development, but very early on in development. Okay. And he already had everything in his head mapped out. So it wasn't there, it wasn't playable yet, but like everything that was in the final game was on a sheet of paper with him saying, okay, this is going to happen, there's going to be this, then we're going to do this, then we're going to sacrifice hearts, and it's going to be harder. And it's almost like he knew everything about the game before it was even programmed.
Wow.
So awesome dude.
So then how do you approach, and I guess for the most part Japan kind of presented what the story would be, but how do you approach writing Palutena and Pit as fresh characters for a series that had not been heard of for years?
I think a lot of it was, and I was also the secondary writer on it, so I did a lot of it, but I wasn't like the lead on it, so I can't take all the credit for the quality of it. That goes to the lead. But a lot of that game, if you play it, a lot of it is them making fun of how long it's been. There's a lot of jokes about that. I think early on in development, Sakurai had the idea for that, and I think at first people thought it was weird, but on the American side, we're like, no, please, let's go meta with this. There aren't, Smash is kind of meta, but besides that, there aren't a lot of meta Nintendo games, at least in my mind. So we went with it, and we ran with it, and we tried to make it funny. And I think it wasn't like, how do we bring back these characters for fans? We're like, okay, how do we make these characters as new characters and just reference that they've existed for a while?
I mean, that game in particular is hilarious to me because for the longest time, covering Nintendo back in the N64 days and playing games before then, Nintendo games were always very restrained when it came to dialogue.
Yes,
right?
yes,
the characters say very little. I mean, Link says nothing.
Yeah.
Samus, for the longest time, didn't say anything until she started ranting about babies.
I mean, in Zelda 2, they literally can only say what can fit in the dialogue box.
Right.
Yeah.
I am error.
Then here comes this game, and it's so freaking chatty.
Right.
I mean, that is the chattiest video game out there.
It's very chatty.
Yeah, it was almost like GTA levels of like you're listening to a radio station while you're driving around, and there's just like this whole talk radio thing going on, but it's the main characters talking to each other. I thought it was like such a sort of refreshing take on anything they'd ever done before, and especially as somebody that grew up with Kid Icarus to all of a sudden be like, oh wait, now there's like like a comedic subplot to this.
And I think Sakurai, to his credit, was like, this is basically a new IP.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a new IP, but nobody, outside of maybe 12 people on the internet, nobody was like, oh man, they messed up Kid Icarus.
Yeah.
Like, it was by and large a new IP, and that gave Nintendo, in my mind, a lot of room to do new things.
Yep.
Again, like, that's all Sakurai's credit. I don't have any of the credit for that, but it was still a lot of fun to work on.
Yeah, and it's interesting to me just how he then took that and in Smash Brothers for Wii U, and for Wii U, because I don't think this appears in 3DS, Palutena and Pit have exchanges. Where, just like Solid Snake and the Colonel did in Brawl, they sort of talk about the other character in the room. And it's a funny little nod to something that was done in that game.
Right.
Yeah.
And I remember casting that. It was a lot of fun, like listening to different voice actors. It was such a cool process to like...
Oh, you got to sit in on that part too?
I didn't get to sit in on the casting. I got to like listen to the voice files and like give my opinion and be like, oh, I think that guy sounds cool.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
I had no idea that the writers got that sort of like that they get to hover into certain sections like that too.
At least when I was there, localization writers, you do a lot. I mean, you're not just writing, you're also working with the marketing team to be like, oh, this is what the game's about. And you're working with Nintendo of Europe because, the British side might be like, oh, you say this, but we'd phrase this differently, or it'd be confusing,
right.
or and you also work with the Latin American translators and the French Canadian translators. It's a very interconnected company. Like it's not just like you'd write the game and give it to somebody, and then like some intern would take it to someone else. It's like, okay, you know everything about the game, so you're going to help us design the box.
Sure. And I think that's like a lot of people, and myself included, have been like reductive about how localization works.
Yeah.
Because it's something where you go like, well, Japan, growing up obviously as a Nintendo fan, you would get it. It wasn't unheard of to get a game a year after Japan did, or especially with stuff like RPGs, and you just be like, well, just get in there and just like change it all to English, and it's like obviously it's not it's not just right? So I mean, the different. I didn't. So like even the voice acting thing is kind of an important part of it.
Right.
I think if you're writing, even if you're writing for a TV show or something, you don't always necessarily get to sit in on who ends up delivering the lines you're writing.
Well, there's also like the difference between. And again, I don't speak for Nintendo now, and I only speak for my experience there, so I'm not like a company representative.
Sure.
But the difference is like in the 80s, like when you saw like an anime show on television, that was because some company bought the rights to that show, and then they were like, okay, how can we cheaply translate this?
Right.
But Nintendo's all one company.
Yeah.
So, they're not giving us a finished project, or they weren't giving me a finished project, and I translate it, then give it to them, and they're like, good, done. It's like, okay, here's what I wrote. And usually NCL has people who speak English who are like, okay, you wrote this. What does this mean? Or why would you make this change? Or, oh, we like this a lot. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of gates that are being checked to make sure like nobody's going crazy on the project. It's a very close collaboration.
Yeah, and if you look back just at the company's history, I feel like we didn't get that sort of fine crafted localization from Nintendo until the mid '90s.
Right.
With games like Earthbound specifically, that's one of like the crown jewels of.
And
like
the reason it's called
localization.
Treehouse is because it started to form around when Donkey Kong came out.
Right.
When Donkey Kong Country came out, so they had the Treehouse and Donkey Kong, and that sort of stuck as the name of that group.
Which I think
Nice.
maybe I'm wrong, but I think the first time or the closest we've ever actually come to seeing Treehouse.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, you just can't. I went on
there's security doors and
I went on a tour. Jose and I were at NOA last year, right?
Yeah, for a Splatoon project.
And we went on they took us around a tour, which by the way, like it's just awesome because it's a beautiful green building. It's so cool, and it's also like having grown up getting big things in the mail from Redmond, Washington, with pictures of my favorite characters on it, and then going to visit is really cool. And they have their whole store there that the employees go down to. But there was not even a slim of tiniest chance of being like, can we go check out Treehouse?
Yeah.
But I remember in the 90s, Nintendo Power sent out these VHS tapes for Donkey Kong Country.
Yeah.
And they did this walk through this hallway where you could see all the artwork that Nintendo Power got because people sent in envelope art. And they were like, this is Treehouse, or they made some reference to it. And that's the closest we've gotten to like actually seeing inside those doors. It's a highly secretive place.
I think once when I was there, they did Halloween for kids, like a company Halloween where like kids could come in and trick or treat.
Yeah.
And they opened up Treehouse, and like everyone was very careful to like put away their prototypes. You had to like shut off anything you were working on. They're very, very careful about security.
Even to the people that work at Nintendo.
Yeah, but like if you're
in
bringing
separate
like
buildings, right?
I think they were just afraid like if you brought in like an 8-year-old, who's excited about Nintendo, that he might be like, oh, I saw, we weren't working on a Kirby game, but I saw a new Kirby game, and then tell his friends, then like someone posted online, and that becomes a whole thing.
To be the one guy in history the one kid in history who's like, my uncle works at Nintendo. And he's right.
I remember this happening a few times where, schoolyard talk turns into something online, and then somebody says, oh, this kid from this guy who works at Nintendo, and the dad's probably like,
exactly.
What was it? Was it Cecil in Final Fantasy II?
I don't know, but for me it was when Smash Brothers 4 was in development, and every other week someone or their grandma made a friggin' like, here's your roster, here's the blurry shot. Oh my God, they got Ridley this time, and all that sort of nonsense, which made me just want to put my head through a wall.
Yeah.
No, but thank you so much for sharing. Like, it's really good to hear about. Just that process. I guess my last question to you is, did you ever expect to work for Nintendo? I mean, like, what was that like? Like, did you decide to apply? Was just like a recommendation thing, if you don't mind me asking?
I had a friend there who I used to do comedy with, and he was like, hey, they're looking for somebody who might be able to do like a lighter tone. Maybe possibly leading up to Kid Icarus, but he didn't say that. Because, a lot of people who get into video games like writing more serious stuff, like fantasy stuff and like a little more, purpley RPG prose. And they're like, we want someone who's a bit more goofy. And I was at the end of the season at SNL as an assistant, and I was like, yeah, I'll apply. I will never get it. And I remember even in the first interview I did an interview with one of the people in the Treehouse, and it went so well that at the end of the interview, he's like, great, it was great talking to you. And I was like, yeah, all right, well, I hope you hire somebody. Like, in my head, I thought, I'm not going to get this job. Not because I wasn't qualified, but I just thought, like, working at Nintendo was something someone else did. And they hired me, and they were super cool. They're also, I should say, even though I don't work there anymore, they're an awesome company to work for. Like, of video game companies, they're just super nice to everybody. The last story is, when I worked there, they got a new building. Not because I was there, but because
that'd be cool.
They just happened to open up
and ruin the old one.
The headquarters you visited is different than the headquarters you saw in the old Nintendo Power.
Right. Yes, yeah.
And
it was. They pulled like a Yankee Stadium thing where they built the old one in the new one's parking lot, or whatever, right? Yeah,
and
or vice versa.
Before they demolished it, they had a paintball game in the old building.
I've heard about this,
and I got to play in that paintball game, and I got shot in the nuts. Really, am I allowed to say that? But I got, and it hurt more than anything. I've had a trunk door shut on my head. I don't know who did it, because you're wearing a mask.
The trunk door?
But I just remember that being like this moment where I was like, it was 2 weeks into work, and I was like, oh my God, I'm at Nintendo at a paintball fight, an old Nintendo headquarters, and I got shot right in the nuts, and I was like, I hate this.
Was Reggie in this fight?
Reg definitely played. I don't know what team he was on.
Maybe Reggie shot you in the nuts with a paintball. That's a sentence I got to say.
Story. That's
I
the
doubt
story.
it. I'm sure it was just like some person.
So this was way before Splatoon, right?
This was way before Splatoon.
I wonder if they had any idea that this was
that was going to be a thing.
They were basically prototyping a
paintball, man.
Right.
Like, just that sounds. I heard about this one. I think when we were up there, someone had mentioned it to us, and I was like, "Really? That sounds rad."
It was really cool.
Yeah, it's really.
It was really
hear.
cool, but it hurt.
It's all fun and games until somebody shoots you in the nuts.
All right.
Does it still hurt?
Well,
I mean, the thought of it.
Yeah, exactly.